of the professionals network or professionals community here at MCGP. Our leader is Nadia Bandukta. So Nadia will tell us a bit about the professionals circle that we have here and the programming that takes place. So Nadia, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I know we're not here to talk about the MCPN, but I wanted to let you know a little bit about it, because if you're local or if you're not local, this is the reason why we're bringing people together. I'm, like he mentioned, Nadia Bandukta. I've been part of this community for 2 years. Pre-pandemic, I wouldn't count because we moved to Robbinsville recently. And really hope that you guys continue to stay engaged. This is just one topic that we have. It's our kickoff topic. So what is MCPN? It's the Muslim Center Professionals Network. That's just our new branded name, the MCPN, but really we're trying to make sure that we're staying united and advancing our communities, our professionals, and our young professionals that come up and are curious about careers, but also mentorship, but also for, you know, all kinds of ranges in and demographics within the professional community. So for example, when it comes to what are the basic financial aspects that we need to know as entering college students, in kind of going through our college experience, postgraduate, young marriages, young families, and then all the way into sort of senior and retirement planning and things like that. So no shortage of questions. I mean, we don't even have any sort of, as far as the agenda go, we have a set agenda, and that's why we have incredible speakers here lined up. I'm very, very excited for each and every one of them and what they're about, and what they stand for, and what they're about to teach us today. So come prepared with questions. Let this be a free-flowing dialogue. We hope you stay engaged. If you did not give or scan your name for our WhatsApp chat, that's sort of how we continue to stay engaged as a community. It's also, if you guys want to just flip your phones, we're very, very technologically advanced now, just kind of put a picture and take that, and it'll take you into our WhatsApp chat. And you can stay connected there, and hopefully our future event for our second quarter of this year will be more centered around mental health and holistic well-being in the workplace and with our families. So with that, I'm just going to pass it over, Amir, to our moderator for the rest of the evening.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and it's really wonderful and important that you've got this traction in this series. I know you kicked it off with something around mentorship. Now we're talking about finance. Next quarter, you mentioned mental health and holistic well-being. So that's really the vision here at the Muslim Center, is to give people that holistic development, combining the spiritual and practical together. And that is a really good segue when we turn to the topic of wealth. When we speak of wealth, and we speak of finances and put that in the context of Islam, for many people, the first thing you'll think of, and rightly so, is zakat. Because zakah is one of our pillars, and it is fundamentally related to wealth, and that's an important thing. But really, if you think more deeply about our faith tradition and our way of life, wealth is important for all aspects of Islam. So if we think about the 5 pillars, of course, as we said, zakat is about knowing one's wealth, giving from one's wealth, and spending from one's wealth. And if anyone thinks that he or she should take their money, put it away, and not look at it, one proof against that is zakat. How will you give your zakah if you don't know what you own? So Islam calls for us to be attentive to our assets and to utilize them, to spend from them, and of course to give from them. So that's zakat. But also when you look at the other pillars, so for example, the establishment of prayer requires centers like this, and it requires spending, and it requires resources, and it requires planning. So that's also something for which we need wealth, or we need to use our wealth for that. When we look at Ramadan, remember how we end Ramadan with Zakat al-Fitr, the fitrah payments that we make before the Eid prayer. So we share from our wealth with others before we enjoy the Eid holiday. And if we cannot fast, then we pay a charity in lieu of fasting. So again, the wealth really ties in to all these areas. Hajj is only mandatory on people who have the means to perform Hajj, which is an indication that one should develop the means to perform Hajj, to complete this pillar of our faith. And of course, going back to the first one, Shahada, or witnessing, and Iman, we know that many of the attributes of Allah relate to wealth. So He's Al-Razaq, he's the one who provides for us. He is Al-Basit, He's the one who expands. He's Al-Mumsik, the one who withholds. He's Al-Mu'ti, the one who gives. So really, to know in your heart that God is the source of wealth is a wonderfully important thing for us. So really, wealth spans all areas of Islam, just as it spans all areas of life. So it's, as Nadia talked to us about, it's wealth is something you need to think about in your marriage. It needs something you need to think about as you raise your children. It needs something you need to think about with your relations with your parents and how you'll support them. It has something to do with how you deal with your neighbors and your community. So that when we speak about wealth, it is not a selfish discussion. It is not even a materialistic discussion. This is a discussion about self-improvement and about getting closer to God and using the resources with which He has blessed us in ways with which He is pleased. So know that you're in a good place, and inshallah this will be a beneficial conversation. I'm really, really grateful that we have such a fantastic panel, and we'll introduce them each before they present. But let me explain a bit about why we put together this particular constellation of stars here, this particular group. So we're going to start with Adam from Hupo Advisors. So we're starting most broadly, and then we're getting more specific, and then we'll get it open to questions and answers. So we're going to start with Hupo, and that's going to be Adam Sayed, who will speak to us from the perspective of an RIA, which is a registered investment advisor. And as you'll hear, they do everything from soup to nuts when it comes to financial planning, helping people invest, also wills and estates, and various aspects of charitable giving. Then we're going to hear from Omar Basal from Shukr Investments, who will talk broadly about the investment universe, the assets that are available, how we choose amongst them, both from a religious perspective and from a practical returns perspective. Then we'll hear from Saad Malik of Zoya Finance. I'm sure many of you are Zoya Finance clients and users. It's a wonderful app. And it is your halal your halal investing co-pilot is how it's positioned, and it helps people with the selection of investments and now expanding into the brokerage space so you can hold your investments with them. And then we'll hear from Asma Ben-Gaspia from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who's a real expert and rising star in the ESG investing space broadly. So that's socially responsible investing, thinking about the environment, social and governance concerns, and she's also an Islamic finance rising star, so we're very proud to have her here. And so, as I said, I'll say more about each of them as we get into their presentation, but I wanted you to know what the flow was and why we have them all here. Let me start with Adam. So I'll read to you a couple of paragraphs about Adam. Adam Sayed is an investment advisor at Hupo Advisors, where he supports clients with wealth management and investment advice, in addition to financial modeling, business analysis, and client presentations. Prior to joining Hupo, Adam led a pilot business development program for financial services consulting at Oracle Corporation and served in a client-facing role as a relationship manager at Bank of America, where he helped clients fulfill their needs by aligning products and services with long-term financial goals. Adam completed his MBA from Boston College's Carroll School of Management, specializing in marketing and finance. He received his Bachelor of Arts degrees in Economics and International Relations from Boston University. He is credentialed with Series 7 and 66 registrations. Adam is passionate about hiking, traveling, reading nonfiction, and following the NBA, which has a new all-time scoring leader. And so we'll turn it over to Adam from Hupo Advisors.
Jazakallah khair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Sayed, like Brother Amr introduced me as. I'm an investment advisor at Hupo Advisors. We're a wealth management firm based out of Boston. We specialize in ethical, value-based investing for our clients. We have around $400 million of client assets that we've been able to manage across Hupo in a matter of about 6.5 years. Our client accounts are held at RBC Capital Markets, which is the 5th largest asset manager in the world, and has about $2 trillion of assets on its balance sheet. We're a team of about 15 people, headquartered in Boston, but we also have a representative office in Qatar. We have clients all over the US, and alhamdulillah, we're proud to say that New Jersey is the 2nd largest market for us behind Boston. We also serve numerous nonprofits and charitable organizations by managing their endowments and waqf investments and advising them how to better engage their donors on how to really help them survive in the long term with sustainability projects. So for example, like we help donors with donor advised funds, charitable lead trusts, family foundations, and charitable remainder trusts. So I'll get into that in a minute, but can you go to the next slide, please? The next one, actually. Great. So don't get me wrong, investment services are at the core of our expertise, but really the wealth strategy that we provide allows us to go much further. So we invest our client assets in the stock market, in real estate, private equity, venture capital, and income-focused investments. But we do this in the context of a full wealth strategy. So you see over there on the screen, there's a lot of different tax strategies that we help with. Say if you have a big income or you're selling a property or a business, we are able to help with reducing taxes. We're also able to help with retirement and education planning. We also help with wills and estate planning in a Sharia context to help accomplish your wishes while minimizing your taxes. We also, like Brother Ahmed Rahman mentioned, we help with strategic philanthropy. So helping you live a meaningful life, giving zakat, also helping reduce your taxes, and also while managing your charitable assets in a way that allows you to better help impact the organizations that you care about. And also we have a real estate arm, which helps with direct real estate investments. In the context of broader wealth strategy, we do direct real estate investments. We have, for example, right now we're closing on a large 240-unit property in Houston, which is open to accredited investors and is closing in about 2 weeks. We also help with insurance and asset protection to help with managing your taxes, using the insurance as an investment vehicle while allowing it to grow tax-free as well too. Brother Shiraz, can you go to the next slide? And I also wanted to touch upon the context in which why we're here. So in general, we established Hupo really to become really players in the Islamic finance space because we saw that no one was really helping people who really cared about doing good with their investments. And with that being said, we try to aim our investments to be Sharia compliant, meaning we avoid industries that are haram. Obviously, the ones that are on the screen there need no mention, but you can see the pictures there. We also try to avoid investing in companies that generate interest income like financial services and high debt. And if you can go to the next slide, Brother Shiraz. I just wanted to better give you guys some context about the types of people that come to us for help and see why people come to IRAs in general. So I want to present two cases that are very different from one another. The first here, and obviously these are fictionalized names, but Nancy is a business owner who had a very high income last year of $1.5 million because she's an owner of her own practice, a medical one. And the biggest concern that she came to us with is that she has a very large tax liability if you factor in for the state, federal, and various other taxes of around $740,000. So the first thing that we did was we developed a strategy for her where we were able to save her almost more than $300,000, which is like getting a 30% return without investing any assets. We did this in a multiple array of contexts. So the first thing we did was set up a charitable lead trust, which I had mentioned earlier, and a donor advised fund, which is like having your own private foundation without the administrative burden. Since she gives in charity every year anyway, she was able to invest for up to 20 years while donating her usual amount every year. But in the same way, it allows her to take the deduction of all these charitable contributions in the first year. And then at the end of the 20 years, she's able to take whatever is left in that trust for her money. Next, since she owns her own business, we set up a captive insurance plan, which is it's an insurance company to cover some rare risks that regular business insurance does not cover. And while you invest premiums into this captive insurance company, we're able to use that as an investment tool, and she can access that money tax-free or by taking dividends out of the company. Lastly, we set up a pension and 401k plan for her. She has a 401k plan, but we set up a pension plan that allows for larger contributions pre-tax. And in that context, we're able to really put more money at play while having a very comprehensive risk-managed portfolio that helps her achieve multiple goals. If you can go to the next slide, please, Brother Shiraz. Now, the next person I want to talk to you guys about is Mike, who has a vastly different situation. He's a successful individual as well. He's age 35 and got a very good job recently, alhamdulillah. He is earning around $150,000 a year, but his main concern when he came to us was that he wasn't saving enough for the future. He had around $100,000 of assets that he had prior to consulting with us. And after conducting a comprehensive wealth strategy, we're able to analyze his cash flow and recognize that he has around $3,000 each month that he could be putting inside the investment account. And it may not seem like much, but putting $36,000 a year, compounding with a moderate growth rate of 7%, allows us to present to him a strategy where he's able to get to $2 million, as you can see, in 2042. So, with that, he's able to, it's not accounting for additional income that he may be generating, higher savings rates, and the fact that we would also recommend to him in the future to put him in broader asset classes like real estate and private equity to really increase his risk-adjusted return. So can you go to the next slide? So this is another slide just outlining how we can encourage everyone to start thinking with the mindset of a long-term financial strategy. So we do this by first meeting with the client, taking down all the relevant information, their strategic goals, their risk tolerance, liquidity needs. We analyze those deeply, and then we customize a strategy that's based upon their needs. Finally, or second to last, we execute on that plan. We are able to actively manage our portfolios and fine-tune their goals as they come to us with them. And we obviously strive for the best results. Next slide, please. So you can scan that barcode up there, since you guys are very technologically oriented, alhamdulillah, to book a consultation, and you can visit me or Asad in the back after with any questions or if anyone's interested in that real estate deal that I had mentioned before. So I'll pass it along back to Brother Amr. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please join me in thanking Adam. And if I may say a couple of things about Hupo that Adam may be shy to say himself, is they have had a huge amount of social impact. And in fact, the origins of Hupo relate to the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center, ISBCC, in Boston, and a group of individuals trying to help through strategic philanthropy, so charitable lead trusts, charitable remainder trusts, so various instruments by which they could strategically have philanthropy go towards that center as well as other good causes. And then the RIA, of course, was there, and it grew, and it's been very successful, reaching now, as Adam told us, over $400 million of assets under management. And so one thing we do talk about, and we're going to speak about zakat right before Ramadan, as we customarily do here at MCGP, is the importance of these donor-advised funds as a very important tool, because if someone is giving charity every year, which we know from a religious perspective we're required to do, and they also have inconsistent income or income that goes up and down, it's volatile, then donor-advised funds are very important vehicles for you to be tax efficient and also consistent in your giving. So I can attest to them firsthand how useful they've been for us as a family, and I trust for many of you as well. It's a very easy step to take and an important one. So thank you, Adam, for sharing everything, and also for the impact that your firm is having on the community. We'll turn to Omar Basal, who is a foremost expert on Islamic investment. He's from Tennessee, but where he and I first met was in the Middle East, where he was head of asset management for a major family office based in the Gulf, and very committed to Sharia compliance. So he is very committed to the ethical principles of investing that come from the Muslim tradition, while also being top-notch and world-class in managing very, very large portfolios, as he has. So he's worked with and interacted with the world's leading asset managers across a range of asset classes. And since leaving that family office, he now heads Shukr Investments, which he'll tell us about in terms of what they do. But today's conversation will be more broadly about the various asset classes in which one can invest and how one thinks about that, both religiously or from a spiritual perspective, and also from a practical perspective. So he's joined us from Arizona. So we're very grateful to him for coming here. And he splits his time between Arizona and Abu Dhabi. So Omar, the floor is yours.
Thanks. If you don't mind, I'd like to present.
Oh, Yeah.
This part, yeah. So I'd like to actually just stand in front of the slides. It will make it easier to understand the presentation. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. Jazakallah khair for the invitation, Brother Amr. I'm honored to visit your masjid. It's amazing. And when I told friends about coming out here, they immediately said, oh, that's a nice community. I said, all right, alhamdulillah. So what I'm going to talk about today is the investment universe. Basically, A to Z investment options that Muslims as well as, frankly, non-Muslims have in front of them to invest. Primarily Muslims, though. And I'm going to shoot for this talk to be 15 minutes so that we can leave more time for the Q&A. So Brother Shiraz is going to be my Logitech, if you don't mind today. Thank you. Is there, unless you have a... No, I don't know. Okay, well, we're just going to... Manual is sometimes the better way to go. So let's first just introduce what are the investment options out there? What's available for any person to invest in? And this is ranked from the lowest returning, lowest risk to the highest returning, highest risk. So number one, currencies. The dollar, the yen, euro, the Swiss franc. These are all currencies that people can invest in. Number two, commodities. Gold, silver, oil, agricultural commodities, energy commodities is another investment option people have. Real estate, homes, could be commercial buildings, industrial sites, is another investment option people have. Sukuk, so you got it, okay. Sukuk, I try to pick a little pause to...
It's working. It's working really well, yeah.
So sukuk are basically, you can think of them as like Islamic bonds, but because bonds are not permissible in Islam, the sukuk is like a investment alternatives that can mimic some of the return characteristics. Public equities, better known as stocks. I probably should just say stocks, because everyone knows stocks, but stocks are shares of companies that are publicly listed in the market and is another popular investment option. Private equity, so these are companies that are not listed on the stock market, but is another major investment class. Frankly, Brother Amr is the expert in this area, but I'm going to briefly talk about what private equity is so you understand that it is an investment option. So again, from lowest returning currencies and lowest risk all the way down to the highest returning and highest risk, this is how it's ordered. Now, one thing I loved, I went to school nearby here, and I always like to see these tables of historical returns going back 100 years, because you need historical perspective to understand how each asset class has behaved. So let's start with the first one, currency, the dollar. How has the dollar as an investment vehicle been? If you bought the dollar, if you held a dollar 100 years ago and you held it today, how did you do? You lost roughly 2.3% per year. That's horrible. So clearly, currencies are not in general a good investment vehicle. Commodities such as gold, and so I'm presenting here data for gold. And by the way, these returns are what's called after inflation, so that we've accounted for the fact that we don't want inflation to distort the real return. So you can see here that if you owned gold 100 years ago, held it till today, you made 0.8%. So generally speaking, commodities don't give you much return. Housing, and this is being measured as US housing, believe it or not, lower than you might expect, 0.8% per year. And I'll discuss why that appears so low, but it is in fact low. After housing, we have the sukuk, and I'm using here an Islamic index. It's returned about 1.9% per year after inflation. So again, it's a lower returning but lower risk investment vehicle. Stocks here, after inflation, historically have generated about 7% per year. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty good way to grow your wealth. And then finally, private equity here measured as the US private equity, because frankly, private equity as an investment class as we see it today is only become popular in the last couple of decades. So 100, 200 years ago, there weren't these pooled funds that we have today. But you can see private equity has generated after inflation 11.4%. So now you have some sense of how each of these different asset classes return. So let's just talk a little bit more about each one. So with respect to currencies, what you should understand is that all currencies in the world are either fixed or floating. Fixed means that it's going to be pegged to a specific commodity or another currency. It's going to be kept to a specific number. So as an example, I used to live in Saudi Arabia. And in Saudi Arabia, 20 years ago, $1 equaled 3.75 Saudi riyals. And today, $1 equals 3.75 Saudi riyals. It's pegged, it's fixed. So the government has committed to fix that. However, if I were living in Turkey 10 years ago, I don't know the exact exchange rate, but I'm sure probably $1 was around 2 Turkish liras. Today it's about 18.5 Turkish liras. That's called floating. So currencies can be fixed or floating. So what you should understand is that currencies are not really traditional investment options, and therefore they're really mediums of exchange. Even in Islamic history, currencies we're using to buy or sell, we're not using them as an investment asset class. Commodities. So commodities are real assets that we're using day to day. When you fill up your car with gas, when you drink orange juice, bread, everything that you're consuming, these are all different commodities. I have some pictures here in case, brighten the slide a little bit. Brother? So one thing about commodities is that they don't pay dividends. So if I own a barrel of oil in a warehouse somewhere, it's not going to give me income every month, okay? In fact, it's the opposite. I have to pay money to keep it stored. So they don't pay any income for you. Over the long term, they've not been a good investment asset class. So generally speaking, put your money in a commodity, you're going to get about 0% after inflation. Even though there are periods when they do very well, that's when everyone complains to the government. And then when they don't do very well, everyone's very happy. Real estate. So real estate is a very popular investment class. Of all the investment classes, if you want income, meaning give me cash in my pocket right now, real estate's your best option, because real estate gives you the highest income of any asset class. Many people think, oh, real estate is so safe, never goes down, it's hard land. The reality is, when people compare real estate returns, for example, to public equity, they forget sometimes that when you're comparing, say, a house I bought, I borrowed 80% or 90% of the money to purchase that house. Whereas when you buy stocks, generally you're not using any debt. You're not borrowing money for it. So you can't compare, oh, I made 50% on my house and I only made 10% in my stocks because, well, you borrowed 90% for that house purchase. So the debt can actually significantly change the risk characteristics. Unfortunately, many people have a lot of their wealth, if not most of their wealth, tied up in real estate, especially their own house, due to government incentives regarding interest. And this is a very bad thing because you don't want most of your wealth in one of the lower returning asset classes. You want it in a higher returning asset class. So it doesn't mean that you don't own real estate. You can own real estate, but it shouldn't be like 80% of my portfolio is in real estate. So this just shows you a chart of an index that was developed by Robert Shiller from Yale University, covering real estate prices going back to 1880. So basically, in his index, it's risen from 100 to 180 in about 120 years, roughly, 140 years. And that's 80% return after 140 years, not a really good return. Sukuk. So Sukuk are Sharia-compliant instruments that generate income for individuals in the Middle East and in Malaysia and Singapore, and you will find more Sukuk options. In the US, it's fewer. There are some funds that provide Sukuk income, but they are harder to come by. What they do is they basically pull investor money and they purchase assets, and those assets will generate some income. And then the issuer of the Sukuk promises at some future date to repurchase those assets from the investors. And so in this way, it's almost like a bond, because I put money down, I'm going to get some income for a couple of years. At the end of it, I'm going to get my money back. That's the general principle. So stocks, which is what Shukr Investments focuses on, these are investment in companies that are listed in a stock market. Okay? And I've listed here just some well-known companies. Many of the largest companies in the world are listed in a stock market, which means that you can buy or sell it any morning, any day. And the beauty of that is that a lot of these companies are, employing some of the most knowledgeable people to think about how to grow business over time. And as an individual, you can actually participate in the success of that firm. And you don't have to actually go knock on their door and say, listen, Mr. Bezos, I really want to purchase shares of your company. You can just go to your stock market, click a button, and you can own a small share of his company. So this is the beauty of stocks, is that you can own a piece of a business that typically can grow over time, and you can do it very easily, especially even internationally. So we can invest in companies in Japan or in other markets without having to go and speak to each company individually. Last investment option, my last slide actually, is private equity. So these are companies that are not listed. It's a very simple, some of them are listed, public equities, some aren't listed, private equity. And I've listed here, and for the hometown crowd, I put Wawa. Mm-hmm. It took some time, but I found some private company here. And Instacart, Cox, these are some well-known private companies. So if I want to invest in Wawa, I don't go to open a brokerage account. I have to go to who owns Wawa, the company itself, and tell them, listen, I want to purchase shares of your company. And either I have to buy my shares from another owner, or the company has to decide to raise capital and issue shares, and I participate in that round, and they get to choose who they sell the shares to. So you can see it's not an easy process. If you invest in the companies that are just birthing, that's not even a right, that are just born, I don't know, it's not a bad analogy. If you're investing in new companies, they're called venture capital. Whereas more mature companies, they traditionally it's called private equity investing. So what you should know about private equity is that this is an amazing asset class. It's historically done very, very well. However, it is generally only available for institutional investors and high net worth individuals. So I'm going to end this part of the presentation now, and I'll just mention that one area that I would like all of you to think about in terms of your investment portfolio is, how concentrated am I? Am I putting too much of my money in real estate? Am I putting too much of my money in the dollar or gold? A lot of people like to buy gold. You should seriously think about that. And how much is too much? I mean, that's why there's financial advisors that can help answer that question. But I would also ask you to consider, how concentrated am I geographically? Am I putting all my money in the US? Do I have exposure to other markets as well? Because our view is that the next decade might be a decade characterized by very low or negative returns domestically in the US and higher returns internationally. So these are two questions I'd like you to consider, and I'll turn it over back to Brother Elmer.
Thank you so much, Omar. And if people want to reach out to you with questions or to learn more, how do they do that?
So there is our business cards on the table when you're leaving. Our website is shukrainvestments.com. You can also visit our website. Thank you.
So Saad Malik from Zoya Finance is one of our own. He's a Central Jersey person. And Zoya is known to many of you, and I think we'll see a presentation about its impact that it's having. What I'll share, if I may, is something a bit more personal about Saad, which is that don't be surprised if you see him volunteering here at MCGP and not necessarily sitting up on a stage, but in the parking lot helping people park their cars when it's late and you're tired and it's Ramadan, or picking up chairs after a function here. And so he's a rare CEO who also, mashallah, is very rooted in the community and volunteering his time. And we're really blessed to have him here in our area. And he'll be telling us about Zoya. As I mentioned, it is positioned as your halal investing co-pilot. And we'll hear more about that. And Saad, thank you for what you do. Zoya we're really proud to know that it's a Jersey company, that you are here and that you're operating from here. So over to you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Brother Amer. And Brother Amir plays an instrumental role in the success of our company so far, so I'll get to that a little bit later. But so I'm the co-founder and CEO of Zoya Finance. We typically just go by Zoya. We are building an investing app for the masses, specifically for Muslims globally. And if you just look at the screen over there, if we could just stay on that slide. I co-founded the company with a childhood best friend of mine. His name is Bilal Qadri. We grew up together here in New Jersey. Shortly after leaving school, I joined JP Morgan, where I was a product manager for about 5.5 years within the private banking division. And my co-founder Bilal was a software engineer at Amazon Web Services for over 7 years. In fact, he joined Amazon back when AWS was a sub $1 billion business, which if you guys are in tech, you know AWS runs most of the internet today. So he has built the infrastructure and seen it grow over the years. That photo on the bottom right is actually a photo of us in my parents' basement. We used to get together on our nights and weekends and work on random projects and hackathons and kind of little apps and whatnot. So for us, it was very common for us to kind of partner up together and build things in our spare time. And so when it came time to starting the business, it wasn't really anything uncommon for me to reach out to him and say, hey, let's try to tackle this problem together. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so more about the company itself. As I mentioned, we are an investing app for Muslims. You can download the app from the App Store or the Play Store. We launched formally in May of 2020, so right at the beginning of the pandemic. Although unofficially we launched in 2019 when we were still kind of a small MVP private beta at the time. Today we have over 150,000 users globally who use our app on a regular basis to essentially manage their own investments in a halal way. We have grown to about a team of 10 at the moment across 7 countries. So we are a fully distributed, fully remote team. We thought, hey, we're launching in the pandemic, so why not embrace that fully? And so we said, let's just go find the best people anywhere we can in the world. And so it does make it a little bit difficult to set up meetings, but otherwise we try to do most of our work over Slack. We are also a VC-backed startup. So back in 2021, we raised money from investors, and it was a great time to raise money from investors. And so we already had quite a bit of inbound interest, and so we thought, okay, let's go out and raise some money. Coming back to what I was mentioning about Brother Amir in the very beginning, he was actually the first person I reached out to when I was thinking about raising money just to get advice. And about 20 minutes into the conversation, I realized it wasn't much of a advice sort of conversation. It was more so a pitch for investing, and he ended up becoming my first angel investor. So I'm very grateful to him for that to this day, and we went on to then raise about $1 million after that. So that's kind of the story so far. In terms of what I want to cover today, I think Brother Omar shared quite a bit of detail, so there's not much detail in my slides. I just kind of kept it high level. But in terms of when we talk about Islamic investing principles, I like to break it down into 3 things that are really practical in terms of helping you understand and kind of manage your own investments. The first is this idea of Sharia compliance. I'm sure you've heard this word over and over. Like, what does that actually mean? And very simply, it just means that an investment that complies with the values and requirements of Islamic law, right? And so in the context of our app, what we do is we help you screen equities or stocks for Sharia compliance. So if you're interested in, say, Apple or Microsoft or Alibaba or Tesla, you would come to Zoya, you would search for the stock, and we would tell you whether or not it is Sharia compliant. And we don't just tell you if it's Sharia compliant, we break down the entire process for you and give you all the underlying information so that you can really understand where we're sourcing the data and how we came to that conclusion. And that was really important for us because if you go back to when I started working on Zoya and why the idea even came up was because I was in my early 20s and I wanted to manage my own portfolio. And at the time I realized that there was really no easy way for me to screen investments on my own. I would either have to work with a investment advisor or invest in a mutual fund. But if I wanted a customized portfolio, invest in stocks that I cared about, there was really no easy way for me to do that. And so I built an app that would essentially do all that hard work for me in screening it and help you decide what is compliant and what isn't. The second part of investing, or when you are investing in stocks, is purification, or in Arabic, there's a term called tathir. And this is the idea that an investment could be Sharia compliant, so it meets the criteria for you to invest in it. However, there may still be a portion of it that is coming from impermissible sources. So once we dive into this a little bit deeper, when it comes to Sharia compliance standards, most standards say that you cannot invest in a company that earns more than 5% of their revenue from something that is impermissible from an Islamic standpoint. So for example, Apple, it's a technology company, mostly okay, but they do have a little bit of interest income, right? Because they're holding on to so much cash. And so that interest income, you need to determine how much of that is relative to their total revenue. And if it's below 5%, you can still invest in Apple, but whatever that exact figure is, you need to then purify it by way of performing purification, which is essentially you apply a formula, you determine, okay, well, based on this percentage, I'm going to donate X amount to purify my investment. So that's the second part of Islamic investing. The third part is zakat, right? So as Brother Amir mentioned, it is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, of course. We're all familiar with it. But when it comes to stocks specifically, I think historically, just to keep things simple, most people treat their investments as cash and they'll just take 2.5% of that. And that's actually not an accurate way of doing it. And so the right way to do it is to determine the zakat liable amount of your investments. And you have to look at the underlying assets and liabilities to determine that. But there was no easy way for people like you and me to do that historically. And so last year, we actually built a tool on our website. You can check it out. It's completely free. That allows you to input your portfolio holdings. So you can say, I hold 5 shares of Apple, 10 shares of Tesla, so on and so forth. And then with one click, we tell you exactly how much you owe in zakat. So it's a much more accurate way of assessing your zakat number instead of just paying 2.5%. And we're building a number of other tools around that as well. So I'm excited to get in deeper into the conversation. Happy to answer any questions. If you go to the next slide, please. If you scan that, you'll be taken to a page that will have a bunch of resources. So you can download the app from there. You can access our blog. You can access our community forum. We've also built a 12-part email course. It's completely free. It's on halal investing. So if you have absolutely no idea where to start with investing, you can just sign up for that free email course. And every single day we'll send you one lesson. And by the end of the 12 days, you will feel much more comfortable with starting on your investment journey. And that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Saad. And we are doing great on time, so we're just about 6:45. And so our final panelist will present for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, and I'm sure it'll be a very rich discussion. And I'm so pleased to introduce our fourth panelist, Sister Asma Bengaspia. I'll read a little bit from her bio, and then I'll tell you other things I know about her, which are lovely and really admirable. So Asma Bengaspia is a senior investment analyst in social investments at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, where she manages a $140 million portfolio of impact investments that seek to advance opportunity and well-being for low-income children and families in the United States. Ms. Bengaspia also sits on the Foundation's investment team, which manages the Foundation's $35 billion, with a B, endowment. Ms. Bengaspia is a Nina Fritz Scholar at New York University's Wagner School of Public Service, where she specializes in social impact, innovation, and investment. She is a World Economic Forum Global Shaper. Those are the Davos people. In the Global Shapers community, a convening of students and professionals who seek to drive positive impact in their local communities. In addition, she is a Board of Trustees member at the Muslim Network, an organization that builds inclusive communities across race, gender, age, disability, and convert status. So Asma separately would love to see how MCGP can coordinate with the Muslim Network on the work that you're doing. And my first exposure to Asma was when she was at NYU and was the founder of the Islamic Finance Group at NYU. And they've done some fantastic work, and it's always invigorating to see young people who are studying finance at one of the world's best business schools being also concerned about how to apply their ethical standards to that practice. And so what she's done is help establish that organization, and it's standing, of course, to this day, and it's something that we pray will bring benefit to many people, and of course to Asma herself in this life and the next. So very good of you to do that. Turn it over to Asma, who's going to talk to us about ESG and impact investing. And just a couple of sentences on this is, we've talked so far about how to invest in a way that is permissible and avoid doing things that are wrong, which is very important. So the first principle is to avoid harm. But in terms of doing good, this is what we'll talk about now, is how can there be impact investing that goes beyond avoiding the haram and now seeks to have a positive impact and measure that positive impact in the world. So we're very excited to have her as our final panelist, and then we'll open it up to questions. So please, I do see people taking notes, which is great. Please jot down your questions, take note of them on your phone, and we'll be very happy to address them when we get to that session. Asma, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Jazakallah khair for such a kind introduction, Brother Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So a few of the speakers mentioned kind words about this masjid. I have only similar words to say. I think this is one of my favorite masajid in New Jersey. And even though it's really far from where I live in Baltimore and where I used to live in North Jersey, I try to come up at least a few nights in Ramadan every year just because I absolutely love the environment here. So it's an honor to be here among you all today. So if you go to the next slide. So as Brother Ahmed mentioned, I work in social investments. ESG and impact investing are two really separate things. So I'll go through what ESG is first, and then what impact investing is, and I will tie in considerations for us as Muslims as we manage our finances throughout. So how many of you have heard of ESG before? Just by a show of hands. All right, so quite a bit of you. So ESG is all the hype in finance and on Wall Street right now. And what it stands for is environmental, social, and governance. And essentially what that means is incorporating environmental, social, and governance criteria in our investments. So what does that mean in application? If you go to the next slide. So this is a map of South Florida. And South Florida has significant climate-related and environmental risks. So let's say I'm a real estate investor and I want to buy property and develop, let's say, rental properties in South Florida. One really important thing for me to be thinking about is climate risks, because if you click next, this is a map, an animated map that shows by 2030 how much of Florida is going to be underwater by at least 1 foot, and then by 2100 how much of, again, the southern part of the state is going to be underwater. So if I'm a long-term real estate investor and I want to buy, property in Miami, or I want to, operate a hotel or whatever the kind of the real estate investment is, I need to be thinking about environmental risks, because the chances are by 2030 my property will be underwater. And often real estate funds and investments have much longer time horizons. They operate off of leases that are 99 years regularly. And so for someone who's going to invest in a real estate fund or a property today, if they're not thinking about ESG risks, and in this case especially the E, then they're going to lose money. So the premise of ESG is accounting for ESG criteria in your investment decision making in order to mitigate your risks and enhance your returns. If you go to the next slide, and if you click next. So additional examples we can think about, the green transition within the environmental pillar. So there are, governments globally, and hopefully the US soon, are setting net zero targets, and they're setting regulations to, reduce the amount of carbon emissions that businesses are allowed to develop. And what that's doing is that's creating significant demand for renewable energy and alternative sources of energy, generally. And so what that creates for investors is a significant opportunity to invest in renewable energy investments and invest in all sorts of kind of green tech. And from a financial standpoint, that's very profitable. And so thinking about environmental trends and environmental considerations in investing can actually be very profitable for an investor. If you click next, an example of social kind of considerations, if you think about social risks in investments, many corporations have supply chains that are rife with human rights violations. And if you map out the financial effect of that, when a company has greater human rights violations in its supply chain, it actually has greater risk in having a continuous kind of business model, because the workers will have strikes and they'll walk off the job and so on. And so that disrupts their ability to be able to continue to manufacture products and meet demand in a consistent way. And so that actually hurts their bottom line. Like they're not able to generate financial returns as effectively. On the flip side, all the research shows us that, when workers are treated equitably and they're paid living wages and there's an equitable workplace environment, that actually boosts the bottom line. It boosts financial returns because there's better worker morale, and when there's better morale, there's greater worker productivity. So again, it's this tie between social considerations and then how that affects the bottom line, which is profitability. And then if you click next, a big example of governance-related considerations are, legal and reputational risks. So if the C-suite of a company, has a tendency to break laws and engage in corrupt behavior, that creates reputational risk. It creates headline risk for that company. It makes investors averse to investing in it, and that also hurts the valuation of the company and hurts the bottom line. So that's kind of the general premise of what ESG investing is. If you go to the next slide. So there are kind of two ways to think about, ESG investing, or more grammatically, it's called ESG integrated investing. There are exclusions, which are negative screens, and then there are positive tilts. So these are just a few examples across each pillar. So in terms of exclusions, a lot of environmentally minded investors will say, I don't want to invest in oil, I don't want to invest in mining companies. When it comes to social considerations, I don't want to invest in companies that have human rights violations in their supply chain, and so on and so forth. And then on the kind of the positive side, seeking investments in renewable energy and other environmentally friendly investment opportunities, companies with equitable workplace practices, ethical management, and so on. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, this sounds very Islamic, because from an Islamic standpoint, we want to think about environmental stewardship and socially equitable practices and so on. If you're thinking that, then you're on the right track. In terms of the growth of ESG investments, I opened up by saying it's huge hype in Wall Street, and I'll kind of explain why that is in a moment. But this is a snapshot from a report on the growth of the ESG market globally by PricewaterhouseCoopers. In 2015, the total amount of investments within ESG funds was about $2.2 trillion. By 2020, that grew over quadrupled to about $9.4 trillion. Within a year, it doubled. And the projections by 2025 is that between a quarter and a third of global investments will be within ESG integrated investments. Now, there are a number of different reasons for that, but one of the biggest things that's driving this growth in the US is the generational wealth transfer. So the largest generational wealth transfer in history is going from kind of the grandparents and parents generation right now to millennials. And all the bank surveys show that at least 60 to 70% of millennials want their investments to be in ESG integrated investments. So because of this significant generational sentiment, banks and investment firms are just rushing to rebrand themselves and to offer investment opportunities that are ESG integrated to cater to millennials and eventually Gen Z, who care about these topics within their investment portfolios a lot more than prior generations. So going to the next slide, the one really important Islamic caveat around ESG integrated investments is ESG materiality. And I will shout out Brother Ahmed, because it was through, he and I have regular check-ins and we unpack these topics all the time. And it was through a conversation with him that I really realized that there is a fundamental gap between ESG integrated investments as kind of Wall Street thinks about it and as traditional financial markets think about it, and how we should approach investments within Islam. And that gap comes from ESG materiality. So ESG materiality is this concept that only ESG factors that are financially material are incorporated in the investment process. So what that essentially means is that if there's an ESG factor that's not going to affect financial returns, then I shouldn't care about it as an investor. So I can give you an example. Once I was on a meeting with an investment manager, and we were talking about their investments in the food sector. And I was kind of, they were pitching us, I was kind of on the asset allocator side, and I asked them if they think about human rights considerations within, food companies, because a big part of where human rights violations happen in the food sector are, like farmers who are significantly underpaid, or who might be like working conditions that are akin to modern day slavery. And so I asked them, like, how are you thinking about, equity and justice in the supply chain process in your food companies? And what they said is, we don't think about it, because the research shows us that these workers are so poor that they don't strike, and so there's no disruption to the business model here. So it's not a financially material, factor for us, and it's not going to affect the bottom line. Therefore, when we invest in companies, we don't care whether they have, human rights violations or not. And this was a fund that they were managing that was an ESG fund. And so like that there's that really important gap in ESG branded funds, which is that often they will only look at factors that affect the bottom line. If they don't affect the bottom line, then they don't matter. And that's not Islamic, because Islam, pushes us to think about these factors regardless of whether they're going to make us money or not. And so the ayah that I constantly think of is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, whoever saves a life, it's as if they've saved all of humanity. And on the flip side, if you take a life, it's as if you've taken all of humanity, the lives of all of humanity. And so, and that's obviously a very rough translation, but the point is, we think about ESG related criteria beyond what makes us money and beyond what is profitable for us. And so that is kind of the important caveat to keep in mind throughout the presentation. Going into the next slide, what is impact investing? And I only have, I'd say 6 minutes left, so I might skip a few slides. But impact investing is different from ESG integrated investing in that impact investments seek to generate a financial return, but also have a specific goal in mind to solve some sort of societal problem, be it an environmental problem or a social problem. So in my role, I focus on impact investments that seek to tackle structural poverty and the effects of systemic racism on low-income communities of color in the US. So the idea is, what are market opportunities, what are business opportunities that we can invest in that advance the economic opportunity and provide opportunities for wealth creation for low-income communities in the country. So this spectrum kind of shows it at a high level. If traditional investing is on the left and donations and grants, donations we might get to Helping Hands, Islamic Relief, etc., are on the right, you can think about ESG investing as a step to the right and then impact investing a step further. Impact investing tries to get the best of both worlds. So we're going to make money, but we're also going to drive that positive impact. So if you go to the next slide, impact investments range across thematic areas, and this is just an example of a few. So I mentioned my role. I'm largely focused on poverty and racial equity within kind of the work that I do at the Annie Casey Foundation. You can think about environmental impact investments that seek to close the gender wealth gap and advance opportunity for women, and so on and so forth. If you go to the next slide. So here's a specific example of an investment in our portfolio. So we're invested in a private equity fund, and one of the portfolio companies in the fund is called Pallet. And this is an incredible company that's extremely profitable. What Pallet does is it builds rapid response shelter villages in a day. And so what they do, and this is just an example of what they build. So they'll go into areas that have been hit by natural disasters or areas that have very high populations of homeless individuals, and the government will contract with them, and they will build entire encampments essentially of these homes that are usually one room that also have a bathroom and a shower, and they're able to build these in a day. And the company is extremely profitable because when you think about when natural disasters hit and just the need for a kind of solution like this, I mean, they get contracts left and right, and this company is in the most profitable and best performing impact investment fund in our portfolio. And for context, I mean, in 2022 was a year that was a market downturn. Our impact portfolio out of the entire foundation's endowment was the best performing, sleeve across all of when compared to all the other sleeves. So the financial returns from this company are extremely high. They're meeting market demand because there is a need for this, and they're creating incredible positive impact. And to add on to it, they're very intentional about who they hire. So they hire formerly incarcerated individuals who typically have a very hard time finding jobs and reintegrating into society after they're released, from prison. They also hire formerly homeless individuals, and they give them homes. And they partner with a nonprofit organization that also offers free mental health services and other services to their workers who, also have lots of trauma. They just came out of prison, just got off the streets, etc. If you go next, this is an example of another company, another impact investment opportunity. So it's called the Child Care REIT, and it's managed by this impact investment firm called Mission Driven Finance. So this is one that we have in due diligence right now, and that we're going to invest in, inshallah, if all goes well, in our portfolio. So childcare, it's extraordinary how significant a role childcare plays in closing the racial and gender wealth gap in the US. And it's actually one of the biggest barriers for low-income women of color to access the workforce. So the average cost for childcare in the US today is about $10,000 per child. The median income for Latina women and Black women in the US is $40,000 and $50,000 respectively. And so a mother of two who needs to pay, an average of $10,000 or $20,000 total for her two children, but is making $40,000 a year, that's impossible for her to make the economics work. And so lack of access to affordable childcare is a significant impediment for low-wage women, and especially women of color, to enter the workforce to begin with. And so what this fund is doing is it's seeking to establish and expand affordable childcare centers across low-income neighborhoods across the country, A, to increase the affordability of childcare for low-wage women, and B, to meet the market demand, because these are women who have children, who want to put their children in daycare to be able to go work. So the demand is there, they just need it to be more affordable. And on the flip side, one of the lowest wage occupations in the country is being a childcare provider. And so they're also thinking about paying livable wages to the provider so that they're also allowing them to build their own wealth. And so it's kind of like this impact on both sides, the focus on the employees and also the focus on the customers and the working families who need access to this service. So that's the essence of impact investments. It's identifying unmet market demand, building market rate business solutions to meet that demand, and also solving key issues and key barriers to economic prosperity for poor communities and to environmental stewardship and sustainability. If you go to the next slide. So I'll wrap up with this, and I'll take maybe one more minute and then I'll wrap up, if that's okay. So when we think about sadaqah jariyah, I love the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ tells us, when a human being dies, all of one's deeds cease except for three, and one of them is a sadaqah jariyah. So when you think about an investment portfolio and you think about the positive impact that comes from impact investments, that's an ongoing sadaqah jariyah, and it sustains itself, right? Because it's developing financial returns, and so the pool of funds actually continues to grow, but at the same time, the positive impact that comes out of it continues. If you go to the last slide, so an example of a sadaqah jariyah is the organization that I work at. The Annie Casey Foundation is a nonprofit. It was founded in 1948 by Jim Casey, who's the founder of UPS. He typically, I couldn't find the amount that our foundation was founded with, but we have another foundation that's really similar to us, and it was founded with a $25,000 donation, in the mid-1900s as well. So my assumption is that the Annie Casey Foundation was also founded with, anywhere between a $10,000 to $25,000 donation. The endowment grew over time, and now it's $3.5 billion. We disperse at least $80 million in grants every year, and that's aside from the funds that we use to generate impact internally as a foundation. And our endowment is invested with both ESG considerations, and we invest in direct impact investments. So when you think about the organization that I work at, and I sit up, so we have kind of two sides. We have our grant making side and then the investment team, which is where I sit. But when you think about sadaqah jariyah, I'm Jim Casey wasn't Muslim, but my guess is he probably has a pathway to Jannah because of the extraordinary impact that continues almost a century after his passing. And so this is how I would encourage us to think about our investments in the long run, is thinking about not only how we can make money for ourselves, but also, how it is that we can use our wealth to advance positive solutions. You could just click next, on all of them. This is a high-level example. I forgot the slide was here, but this is a picture of a few survivors and a rescue team from the earthquake that just hit Turkey and northern Syria. So from an impact investor standpoint, there are so many opportunities that we can manage and kind of shape impact investments to serve the victims of the earthquake. So for example, there are edtech solutions, right? Edtech companies focus on making education accessible to people who don't have access to, a typical school building. So for example, there's an organization called Rumi that developed K through 12 curricula on tablets that don't require Wi-Fi connection, and they pass these tablets out to children who live in Syrian refugee camps, and these children are able to complete their full elementary, middle, and high school education through these tablets. Thinking about fintech platforms, how can we, and these solutions exist, it's just a matter of getting them there, but fintech platforms think of try to address the component of financial inclusion for communities, again, that might not have access to banks, that might not have credit scores, giving them opportunities to build their savings and to access investments and so on. Pallet is like another great example of if we could bring Pallet to the Middle East to develop, these rapid response villages for people who are now homeless in Turkey and northern Syria, and so on and so forth. I mean, the examples are endless, but that's essentially, that's an overview of what ESG is, what impact is, and then thinking about how these opportunities can then tie back to our communities and how we can play a role in tackling challenges that, people across our Ummah are facing. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you so much. And if you're like me, you come enthused, you become excited when you see all this energy, these ideas, this momentum that we see in the community, and folks who are really making big strides in advancing people's ability to invest, to save, to have positive social impact in what they're doing. So if we were sitting in 20 years ago having this discussion, we would not have these companies and institutions around to learn from. So it's a wonderful thing to see that. And of course, to be learning from people like the Casey Foundation who precede us and have set such a wonderful precedent. So we're doing very well on time. It's 7:07. And what I want to do is see how many questions we have, and then we'll manage the time accordingly. We officially plan to end sometime between, let's say, 7:40, 7:45, and then we have the Iqama for Isha at 8. So we want to make sure we end well before that. But I want to also make sure we hear your questions and concerns and give you a chance to benefit from our esteemed visitors. So let's see. First of all, if you've got a question, if you could just raise your hand so I can see how many we've got. We've got 1, 2. I'm sure there'll be more, 3. So let's take, Noreen will take that as 4. So we'll start with Noreen the next round. We're going to do 3 questions first. So let's do Nadia, then Brother Rani, and then who was the third question? Was it you, the gentleman in the back, please? So let's start with Nadia, please, and then if you can pass it to the gentleman in the back, and then to Rani.
Assalamu alaikum, mind blown. Thank you so much. This is incredible. So before I jump into questions, just a quick thank you to a few of the people that helped organize this and bring you all to the table. Shiraz is not just the person who presses next on the slides, but a huge instrumental effort for making this happen for our Q1 event. And Shabana and Sarah and anybody else who wants to be involved in future events, please do, because this is just the icing on the cake, and the cake hasn't even begun to rise. I don't know, that may be a bad analogy. Anyways, so quick question for you, because Asma, I left thinking, how do we immediately sign ourselves up as private individuals to find the opportunities for the social investment funds? And there's all sorts of websites out there, and from as far as an education perspective, making sure that we understand the portfolios of all the options out there. But what are the reputable websites that we might go to as individuals for the social impact, social enterprises that are coming out?
Wonderful. If you could pass it to the gentleman in the top.
Gentleman in the back, yes. Was that you?
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair. I think we should do more sessions like this. Personally, I thought I've been investing in right channels and with right companies, but I think this session puts a lot of doubts in terms of the practices which I've had in terms of financial investments. So Jazakallah khair. I think awareness is critical for me, for the younger generation, because mashallah, like Brother Amer, and I think the panel members are very educated in, as Muslims, what's best for us in terms of investing. Question for Brother Omar and Brother Saad. For people like me who are heavily involved with Prudential, Fidelity, and so many other networks and groups, any key differentiators on why Shukr Investments or Zoya, right? Apart from highlighting Sharia compliant stocks, which I feel is like a big driver, but few other pointers which can motivate us to move away from the traditional investing firms.
And thank you, Brother Ronnie here in the front, in the green vest, sir, if you don't mind coming forward. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Assalamu alaikum. I echo everybody's feedback that I appreciate you coming out, choosing this topic, but more importantly, I admire all of you for choosing to focus your industry and your careers in something that's more Islamic focused. So along those lines, my question is around the criteria of Sharia compliance. I know in a similar manner, just because something is halal from a food perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean it meets all the organic and health criteria that is our responsibility from that perspective. In terms of Sharia compliance, for me, the BDS movement, which is boycott, divest, and sanction anything Israeli and that promotes the Zionist movement, is very important to me. I'm not sure if that necessarily meets the ESG criteria or Sharia for that matter, but wanted to know if there was any flexibility in any of the programs that you work with from an investment perspective to be able to provide that input and exclude those types of investments.
I'll take it. Thank you. So thanks so much. We'll come to you, sir, in the next round. We'll go to Noreen and then yourself. But we got 3 questions now, and then in the back, Professor. But what we'll do is, as I said, we'll take responses to these 3 questions. Asma, the first question was directed towards you, so we'll give you the mic, and then if others. So I think the first one was specifically for Asma. The second one, for a number of us, you can. Adam, please also feel free to answer on the second one about conventional firms, and then the last question that we had. From Ronnie. But let's start with Asma, please.
Thank you for your question. I was smiling really hard because whenever I have a conversation about impact investments with like anyone Muslim or any Muslim space, it's always the first question that comes up. Everyone's always like, how do we get started? I'm like, I love our community for that reason. And it'll even be like international conversations. Once it's like 2 brothers reached out to me on LinkedIn. They like run like a large import-export company in Turkey. And they needed like advice on like incorporating sustainable practices. And so I explained to them my role, and literally they're like, okay, we have a couple $1 million. When do we get started? And I was like, mashallah, that's like the barakah in like the values that Islam teaches us. So I have like a good answer and a bad answer. And I'll start with like the bad news, which is like the impact investment universe that's Sharia compliant in the US is almost non-existent. So for us to find impact investment opportunities, if we're non-accredited investors, which means we don't have at least $1 million to invest, it almost doesn't exist. And so I think that's a call to action for like Shukr Investments and all the firms here, and myself included, is to start to build up those opportunities more so that our community can access these investment options. From a non-Sharia compliant standpoint, a few of my favorite firms that I've come across, and I know them very well. Adesina is an incredible firm, Adasina. They incorporate ESG considerations, but also seek investments that create impact. And the question on BDS, I mean, one of the key considerations they also think about is like military occupations and apartheid states, and ensuring that they're not investing in them. A few others, again, not Sharia compliant, but just like ones that I've seen. This is not an investment recommendation. Do your own analysis, all the legal disclosures of it. But just in general, Nuveen is another one, Nuveen. They have both ESG and impact funds. Boston Trust Walden is another one. And then Calvert is the last one. Those are a few key ones that I really like, and I follow their work quite a bit. In terms of resources, the best resource is the Global Impact Investing Network. You can go on their website. It's essentially the main international industry association. So you can see who their members are and read more of their research and kind of the investment funds spotlighted on their website. And then to answer your question on just military occupations generally, there's, if you search the fund screener of the American Friends Service Committee, they essentially, it's similar to Zoya, but it focuses on companies that are engaged in the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex in the US, and then occupations globally. And you could see like different companies and different funds and how much of their business revenue comes from these different kind of systems. And so that's a really great resource that I tend to use quite a bit.
Thank you. And so, Asma, while you have the microphone, the second question around moving from conventional firms to ones that might be more values aligned. So clearly you've worked at a number of firms. You've worked at the world's biggest asset manager, as a matter of fact, and now you're at Casey. And if you could comment a bit about finding a financial institution that is closer to your values and how you've been through that journey, and maybe advice for others on how they might consider that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's a constant journey for me. So I think my entire career has been just trying to find ways to make my rizq more halal and tayyib. And it's definitely difficult for so many reasons. The financial system, the global financial system is so rooted in riba. And when it's not rooted in the riba, it's often rooted in like human rights violations. And so it's like one way or the other, it's just constantly trying to find a way to make my investments and my work more Sharia compliant, and like not just Sharia compliant, because I think like the halal versus haram like binary is just the base. It's like, how can I also be more additive to society and like create like a more meaningful legacy for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the work I do. So I think a few things. I think like what I would really like to see, or what I hope to play a role in, is the evolution of Islamic finance such that it becomes more oriented in impact and like the creation of positive impact in society. I don't think that's where it is yet. I think the Islamic finance space is still very much defined by, let's just avoid the riba and the sin sectors, and as long as we're not doing haram, then we're good. But it's like, how can we do more, and how can we play greater roles in that? So this might be like just because of my exposure to Islamic finance only in the US, I don't know yet of firms that are like doing both, but I hope to at least help build them. So maybe if you ask me this question in 5 or 10 years, I'll have different answers. But I'm sure the other panelists will have more to say on that.
Wonderful, thank you. So why don't we start with Omar and work our way back this way, responding to the three questions that were asked, however you feel most suitable. So over to you, Omar.
Bismillah. I think that when it comes to comparing conventional investment companies to Islamic ones, the most important thing is that, you know, an institution that is following Islamic principles is aligned with our faith. And we as human beings are responsible for how we earn our money, how we spend our money, and when we die, how our money is distributed. And we need to make sure that each of these are done in accordance with Islam, because if we're not investing in our money in accordance with Islam, whatever gains we think we're making, I promise are illusory, will not be permanent, and at the end of the day, we don't want to be accountable on the Day of Judgment. So that's the first most important thing. The second thing is that, you know, I'll speak at least for us, you know, beyond the traditional metrics of Sharia compliance, we will find companies which on the outward look fine to invest. They pass the traditional screening. But if you dig deeper, you'll find that they are using Muslim forced labor in China, for example. And so my other point is that you should also care about, and this is more, you know, it's really in the ESG framework that these things are captured, because the traditional Sharia screening doesn't usually account for these factors. But I would, for one, as an investor, would care if my money is in companies that are building equipment that's being used by the Israeli military, or is benefiting from slave labor. These things happen, and it's from companies that you would think nothing would be problematic with them. The third thing is that I'm really, you know, if we were talking 20 years ago, the Islamic finance industry in the U.S. was pretty. It wasn't great, let's say. I think that today there are players that are competitive and in many ways are more focused than a Fidelity or Charles Schwab. I promise you, Fidelity, Charles Schwab are what we call asset gatherers. They need more assets. They don't care about you specifically except to get your money in the door. And they want to create these kind of cookie cutter products that you'll buy into, and you're going to be identical to thousands of others that they've put into that product. So I would tell you that the Islamic financial firms are really focused, and a lot of them are run by people that have backgrounds from BlackRock, or have backgrounds from the top tier institutions. So you shouldn't think that you're giving up returns or risk by going for an Islamic institution. They can still do as well or better. And then the other comments, I think the ESG was by Esma. I don't want to have anything to add to that. On the BDS, I really feel like you have to look at the provider you're working with and asking if they're incorporating some of those factors, because I promise you, that BDS screening is not a normal factor that most firms will use. It has to be something that is more active, where you're, because what we do is we're looking at it on a company by company basis. And we'll find when we dig into a company, we'll find that, oh, this person on the management team was charged with some heinous crime or something, or oh, we found this company is using it's producing corn, but they also have some revenues that are coming from the turning things into ethanol and alcohol that might be used for haram purposes. Those details you won't get unless you kind of dig in deeper. And so I would ask you that the people you work with check if they're doing that level of diligence.
Adam, please.
All right. So there's a couple points I'd like to address. First of all, for Nadia, I think this question was not really related to what I was going to answer, but I thought, just might mention it that one of the investment vehicles that we use the most is called a donor advised fund. That's available pretty much to any investor, so you don't have to be accredited or anything like that. We work with Renaissance Charitable Foundation. They're one of the largest nonprofit institutions in this space. You can start with a donation of $5,000, and you can really use that as both a tax deduction, but also a long-term charitable impact for your family foundation, and work with nonprofits that you care about the most to leave an impact there. Donor Advised Fund. It's the investment vehicle. The next point I want to touch upon was kind of the story behind Hupo and why we started. So in Boston, we're headquartered there, and the origin story really is that a bunch of families that were successful wanted to endow the ISBCC, which is the largest Islamic society or largest masjid in New England. And with that, we discovered the benefit of charitable lead trusts. And we noticed that there was really a niche, or a need rather, for families that wanted to leave an impact and do good with their investments, such that, the Fidelities and BlackRocks of the world don't really have a comprehensive view in mind and don't really understand a lot of Muslims' views, to be frank. So we kind of set our goal to really make this be our baby, in the sense that what we do at work really makes an impact for both for ourselves but also our investors. So a lot of our investors are actually non-Muslim. The majority, in fact, are non-Muslim, but I think they share a lot of our values. And I think you had a question about, BDS and how we screen for that. So I think just wanted to clarify what we do. We take a top-down approach, meaning we look at all the industries across the S&P 500 or the stock market in general. There's about 12. And we look at the industries that we wouldn't engage in, first of all. So with that, we avoid, financial services. We try to avoid interest-bearing companies, like I said before. And with that, we exclude those. And then we do fundamental analysis, meaning we look at the balance sheets of the companies that are strongest in those other industries, like technology, healthcare, etc. And from there, we can kind of glean insights into the balance sheets and see which companies we think are due for strong cash flows, high dividends, etc. In the long term. And upon that, we may find companies that have a background in, Israel, for example, or things that we wouldn't really want to engage with, or our investors wouldn't agree with. But with that being said, I mentioned that a majority of our clients are not Muslim. So if there is a preference there that they wanted to, engage in a certain area, it's our fiduciary duty to take their instructions. So, that's just our philosophy there. And yeah, I'll pass it along to Saad if you have anything else.
So I guess a couple of points. One of the problems with traditional Sharia standards is that they haven't evolved much over the years, and so they're still very much focused on like traditional negative screening, which is minimizing anything that's haram, essentially, right? And we brought that up as a point several times. Hopefully, these standards will evolve. They are moving, and there are active boards that are constantly reviewing them over the years, and so I'm hopeful that, especially now with the kind of the growth in ESG, that these things will start to become more formally involved. Because if you think about it from a Sharia perspective, like that is absolutely critical, right? I mean, it's not just about, as Brother Amr said, avoiding the bad. It's also about doing good with our money. And so we should be making an active effort to do that. And so one of the things that we started doing within our app is we first solved the problem of just helping you screen companies based on traditional Sharia standards. So you can follow the standard, you'll see whether or not something is compliant. about early last year, or maybe even sometime in 2020, we introduced ESG scores as well, and we work with a third-party provider to do that. So now you can actually see, for select companies, you can see whether or not it's Sharia compliant, and then you could also see an ESG rating right below it. So that helps you a little bit more in making that decision in terms of a company could be Sharia compliant, but that doesn't mean it's a good investment, right? This idea of halal and then tayyib, right? And so we're trying to figure out ways to do that, but we're kind of restricted because we're working on, again, we're built on traditional Sharia standards, so we're trying to find ways to evolve that further. And so one of the ideas that we've also had recently that we're exploring is this idea of introducing flags. So again, a company could be compliant, but you may have a custom flag that you set that if this company exists, if this company is headquartered in Israel, I don't want to invest in it. And so you can set those flags on a kind of personalized basis. In fact, we work with some clients in the GCC, and in the GCC, when it comes to investing, they have mandates across the board that say that a company, in order for it to be Sharia compliant, one of the checks is that it cannot be headquartered in Israel. So we already do that as a service for them, and it's something that we're trying to also introduce for retail investors as well. I also wanted to add just some practical advice in terms of your question regarding just getting started. And so Asma, you mentioned Nuveen funds. There's funds that exist out there that are thematic in nature that are already taking ESG into consideration, and the fund is built for that purpose, that if you invest in it, you're investing in companies that have a positive ESG rating and so on and so forth. The problem is, as Asma said, that they're not Sharia compliant, most of them. We've built a tool that allows you to screen holdings for any fund that's listed in the US. And so in the app, if you search Nuveen, you can actually find all of their ESG funds. And the cool thing is you'll be able to see exactly which holding is compliant and which is non-compliant. So what you could do is actually just replicate that fund by investing in the holdings directly. So the fund will tell you, okay, out of 50 holdings, roughly 25 of them are Sharia compliant. And you can open up your brokerage app, whether it's Fidelity, Robinhood, Schwab, whatever, and then go buy those companies directly. So that's kind of like a hack, a workaround for the time being until we have something that's a kind of a more proper integrated solution. Yeah, I think that's all the comments I have.
Thank you, Saad. That's very helpful. We had 3 questions here, and I see a 4th. Are there any more questions? A 5th? Let's probably end with it. I've got you already. So we'll take these 5, and then please, panelists, take notes so that you remember the 5, because I know it's hard to keep them all in your mind, and then we'll probably run out of time after that. So if we could, Dr. Noreen Farsaini already has the mic. Then after you, sir, the gentleman in front, and then in the back, the professor. Then we've got the sister in the brown hijab, and then you, sir, with the Kane University sweatshirt.
Great. So, assalamu alaikum. Thank you guys very much for your knowledge and in passing that to us, and really just helping to define a lot of the financial jargon and rhetoric that non-finance people hear and don't have a context to put it into, and really helping to expand how we think about investments and the impact that we can have from that. The question that I had was, I think there was a question about looking at traditional finance companies as well as shukr Islamic finance companies. The question that I had was, how do we think about companies like Fidelity that have amount of funds and are using that as a way to reach out to the Muslim population now in thinking about investment? Is there a difference? And how do we kind of contextualize those companies?
Please, if you can pass it to the gentleman in front of you.
I just want to thank all of you for the knowledge and information that you've given us. I feel as if the Muslim community in the United States is not very well versed in the financial sector. I think we go more into the STEM subjects than we go into financial education. I have a 2-part question. We live in a democratic society, and we look towards our Senate and our federal government to represent us in foreign policy and domestic policy. When we talk about Israel and the Palestine conflict, since you are from the financial industry, do you feel that the Muslim community being less wealthy than our Jewish counterparts has resulted in the United States having a less focus on the Israel-Palestine conflict, especially in a bias towards Israel? That's my first question. And my second question is that when we talk about Sharia compliance, is cryptocurrency something that you consider to be Sharia compliant, or is it not Sharia compliant? Thank you.
Thank you. If you could pass it to the professor in the glasses in the back.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. That was really informative. Jazakallah khair. I just have a couple of quick clarifications. So would you elaborate on the difference between bonds and sukuk in terms of how they work and their returns? And then regarding impact, there's a large literature in the social and economic sciences about social impact bonds. And I don't know if that made it to, if there are any mutual funds or portfolios that incorporate some of that that one could invest in. And then maybe a more direct point about Islamic portfolios and mutual funds like Wahid and Amana and others. If you guys have any thoughts on those. What are the returns on donor advised funds? And then finally, what do you do about retirement from a point of Sharia compliance where you have limited options to choose stocks or build portfolios?
Thank you so much. I'll take that from you. Please, ma'am, go ahead.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I just have a question based on, I guess, gender roles in a way, but can you please highlight why it is important for women to do their own financial planning or investments and having financial security separate from their husbands or their fathers?
Thank you. One more question here.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First off, incredible program. As a former wealth management professional myself who's in transition out of the field, what is your opinion on like robo-advisors and if there are like any Islamic-focused robo-funds who maybe for like the generations that don't have like as much wealth that is required for like one-on-one brokerage services, and like Charles Schwab or Merrill Lynch that have like $250,000 worth of assets. Are there any funds or like services available to those to like the younger generation who you know of, or if you could highlight to any similar services that so the younger generation can start can start their process towards building wealth without the initial barrier that most of the big firms have put in place.
Thank you so much. We'll start with the reverse flow. We'll start with you, Saad, and work back this way.
Okay, so let's see where to start. Okay, in terms of robo-advisors, there is the most notable company that provides this is a company called Wahid, W-A-H-E-D, Wahid Invest. Brother Amr is also an investor in Wahid. So you can definitely check them out. They're probably the easiest place to start. There are a few other options as well. I'll give myself a shout out. We're also launching Zoya Invest, which is going to be a two-part sort of offering. The first part is self-directed accounts. So if you have, let's say, a Robinhood account or Schwab, you could trade on Zoya just the same way. The second part of it would be managed portfolios. So we would have pre-built halal portfolios for you to invest in. So you don't need to do any research or thinking. You just park your money. We invest it for you. But I would definitely go check out Wahid for the time being. Yeah. In terms of, let's see, Muslim women, I'll just, I guess, share one resource to the sister who asked that question. So on our blog, if you go to blog.zoya.finance, there's an author by the name of Malak Kudemi. She works as a financial coach, and she specializes in Muslim women specifically. And she wrote a really compelling blog post on our blog about investing for Muslim women, and she kind of shares all the arguments around why it's so important for them to focus on it and kind of the challenges, how to overcome that. So I would highly suggest that you check that out as a resource. Crypto, I can, I guess, comment on that. There's a variety of different scholarly opinions. When it comes to that, it's still developing. Generally speaking, it varies from from one crypto to another. It's not so much, is all of crypto halal or not. It's kind of like depending on the nature of the cryptocurrency, so Bitcoin versus Ethereum and so on and so forth. Is it an asset? Is it a currency? All of that as well. We started looking into creating some sort of a screening criteria for crypto a while back. So we worked with our Sharia board to do that, and we have something preliminary that we might put out there and start sharing just for, let's say, the top 5-10 cryptocurrencies. It's not that we're promoting crypto, it's just that we recognize that our customers and our users are investing in crypto whether we like it or not. And so they need a way to be able to navigate that. And so if we can provide some sort of guidance around it from a Sharia perspective, it would be useful. So I think it's certainly something that's still being developed. Yeah, I think I'll just stop there for now. Thanks.
All right, so those were, first of all, I think these are really wonderful questions. We're really only just hitting the tip of the precipice here, so inshallah, all of us are resources that you can consult for any further questions if we run out of time. So the first question about Amana and Fidelity, we invest millions actually in Amana. They're one of our close partners. They're a mutual fund though, so meaning you invest with them and you basically are investing in a fund. You don't get the full portfolio of wealth management or financial planning. You're just investing in that one single fund. Another question was about the impact of Muslims investing versus Jews. I think there's a lot of ground that we have to make up in this field, frankly. With these type of charitable organizations that we're talking about, donor-advised funds, charitable trusts, charitable remainder trusts, family foundations, etc., I think we can leave a larger impact there for the future if you start talking with an advisor or with a trusted attorney to kind of set up those plans so you can leave a legacy far beyond your life. In terms of bonds, HUPO is a policy. We don't actually really, go that much into bonds. We alter on the side of real estate as kind of an alternative investment opportunity rather than focusing on bonds. And then someone was asking about the returns of DAFs. So I just wanted to clarify, a donor-advised fund is an account, an investment vehicle in which you would invest in the stock market. So really the returns of the DAF are dependent upon what you're investing in. So you could ask me more about that later. In terms of financial planning, the difference between men and women, from a suitability perspective, we don't really, take the perspective of a man versus a woman. We kind of take, as a registered investment advisor, we're obligated to look at liquidity needs, risk tolerance, other suitability needs to determine the best financial plan. But with that being said, I think everyone should be, I think the biggest gap when it comes to investing is the lack of financial literacy that's out there. So I think everyone needs to have, regardless of gender, a very sound financial background. You can kind of look up different resources online. To shout out a few, you could look up at Investopedia. Khan Academy has some great resources on the mechanics of the stock market. Barron's is another financial journal that allows you to better understand the news and what drives the economy. I think everyone has an obligation, if you're investing in the stock market, to do your own research. And I think doing that, baseline stuff will help everyone in the long run. And in terms of robo-advisors, to be frank here, they're kind of our rivals. As a financial planner, we're really trying to give a customized strategy as to how to manage one's wealth. And I think the gap that robo-advisors have that we provide better services for is that we really customize a strategy. We allow you to go deep into the numbers, like the cases that we mentioned. We're able to help with tax strategies, liquidity needs, windfall planning, estate planning, etc. And we don't really view crypto, from a halal or haram perspective. We kind of avoid it in general. We think it's very speculative right now, and don't really view it as a long-term asset. So I'll pass along the mic.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. So I think 3 of the questions perhaps related to impact. I think on the question on just Palestine more generally, I think I struggled a bit with the phrasing of the question because I never want to conflate Jewish and Zionist. Jewish communities are an identity. They vary in their political views. Zionism is a political movement. And then I think in terms of just like the underlying tones, if I put my community organizer hat on and think about like how some of like my Jewish counterparts might take the question, I think there might be some underlying assumptions on like the level of influence or wealth that might affect the political leanings of the U.S. And I always just struggle with kind of like this discussion in a public space because I think it's important not to conflate the Jewish community with a political movement and what it is that might be perpetuated kind of in assuming the conflation of the two. So all that's to say, happy to take that question offline because I think there are more layers in it that we can unpack. In terms of social impact bonds, it's a great question. So at Casey Foundation, we don't really engage in social impact bonds that much. The way social impact bonds work is, you make an investment in a bond, and you get paid back only if the impact metric or the impact targets of the bond are achieved. Historically, there have been mixed results in terms of their success in achieving social impact. So typically we do many more equity investments in venture capital, private equity, et cetera, in companies like Pallet, since those tend to be a lot more direct in the impact they're generating. And then the last question that I'll take, which is my favorite one, I mean, they're all my favorites, but I love that one in particular, on why it's important for women to have financial literacy. So, we discussed this question in preparing for this session, and this one stat by UN Women just like popped up in my mind, that 1 in 3 women globally face domestic violence or abuse in some form at some point in their lives. That stat is 1 in 4 in the US. So 1 in 4 women face abuse from a partner or someone in their direct household at some point. And the number one reason that women stay in these relationships is because of financial dependence. And so conversations on financial literacy are crucial for your daughters, your sisters, your wives, et cetera, because that's what gives them the guarantee of safety and the option to be able to leave if they find themselves in an abusive situation. And so I think the other thing that came to mind for me is growing up, the way my father raised my sister and I is if you want to accomplish anything, you need to be financially independent and self-sufficient. And so it was funny, we loved purses and all sorts of things growing up. And so I'd be like, Bubba, I really want this purse. He'd be like, you want this purse? Go get A's to go to a good college, to get a good job, to buy the purse. And that was always his answer for anything we wanted that might have been pricey. Is oh, you really want that? Okay, show me what you're gonna do to get it. And I'm really appreciative of that because we grew up to be, alhamdulillah, very financially self-sufficient. And so I think that mindset, just looking at the attendance, right? And women often don't think finances are relevant to us. There are way more brothers here than sisters. It's something that growing up and the way we're conditioned in society, we just don't find it. We don't find money or investments as women's talk. It's often left to the brothers. And so changing that culture and creating that awareness and establishing that literacy, that financial literacy among girls starting from a young age is extremely important. You mentioned, the Zoya resource was mentioned. The other resource I'll share is Ellevest, Ellevest. It's an investment firm founded by women for women and puts out a lot of research and runs a really great blog to cater to the financial and investment needs of women in particular. So I highly recommend checking that out as well.
So Bismillah. First question regarding, I think it was really regarding how Shukr's different. And what I'd mention to you, why are we called Shukr investments? It's from a verse in the Quran, in Surah Ibrahim. Allah says, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ, which roughly translates as, if you show gratitude, then Allah will increase you. So how do we show gratitude? Is it by simply putting a name on the company door? No. We show gratitude by donating 50% of performance fees generated to charitable causes, and our investors are the ones that choose those charitable causes. So we've donated to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, Islamic Relief, the Michael Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. And so we're trying to make a positive impact, not just enrich our investors. Another way we're different is global. So most of the managers will typically only have accounts in the US, and they'll invest in foreign companies listed in the US. Shukr, we have accounts in about 50 different stock markets. So we can access stocks in India, Indonesia, Singapore, Japan, Brazil, Korea, Taiwan. So we have a significantly larger palette to work from instead of just stocks listed in America. And we also do a Sharia audit. So every year we have a Sharia advisor, and they have to make sure we're following the Sharia principles. Second question about, is US policy affected by the financial contributions? Ilhan Omar was in some rough waters when she made any comment around that. So it's obviously, just like Esma said, a very kind of politically sensitive thing to discuss. But I can say, in general, the political situation in DC is heavily affected by donations. As you may have heard that FTX was a significant contributor to many causes, and that helped further their growth. So it's no different in the foreign policy sector. I think crypto really has been answered, though I would recommend Sheikh Yasser Qadi has posted lengthy lectures about Bitcoin. Difference on bonds and sukuk. So when you do a bond, you're making a loan to a company. Typically, there's no backing behind it. It's just a loan to the company, and they promise to pay you back. Whereas when you're investing in a sukuk, you're an owner in a pool of assets, and therefore, technically, if you wanted to, you could, if the company can't pay, you have the rights to those pool of assets. So it's a very different kind of risk characteristic. With respect to the women in finance, I neglected to mention Sarah from Shukr, who's business development for us, if you have questions about Shukr. I really think it's important that more women get involved in finance. I'll tell you that, interestingly enough, women investors outperform men investors. And why do you think that would be the case? Risk appetite? So, it's generally because, or thought to be because, that women, when they make a mistake, are more likely to admit it and fix it, whereas men are more likely to come on, turn around, So, believe it or not, women can excel for, if more of them enter the finance sector, apart from the reasons that Esma discussed about, dependency. And then again, the robo-advisory, it may have been covered. Alhamdulillah, there is now Wahed, and mashallah, Zoya is apparently also going to be entering the space. And then Hupo is, also doing something different. I mean, alhamdulillah, each firm is catering to different kind of clientele. We only can cater to accredited investors like some of the other firms. But alhamdulillah, even for people who can't invest that larger ticket size, there are firms like Wahed that can accept like $100. So this is the beauty that the industry continues to grow and benefit. May Allah put more barakah in our work and make us successful.
Thank you. Did you want to take that question?
So a brother asked about Sharia compliant companies regarding lending money for the purchases of real estate housing. So the North American Fiqh Council has issued a pretty extensive fatwa on this matter because there are providers, I'm sure some of you have heard of a couple of them, and they really provide details about the Sharia compliance of them and who they kind of think are past that are qualified. Anytime it's about a fiqh issue, we stay away from. But there's obviously guidance is the most well known and popular and probably been in the business longest. The University Bank. There's a couple of others that are doing it. I'm sure I may not have listed everyone, but I was going to recommend the brother to the North American Fiqh Council ruling or opinion, where they list out all the American companies and they tell you how they view them in their compliance.
Thank you. So we're 10 minutes from Iqama. I see Brother Tahmid standing in the mihrab there. And so I do hope our speakers will be so kind as to remain here and to take any questions. The contact information for each of them is on the screen, so please do contact them with your questions and with your follow-ups. A question was asked regarding the slides, whether they would be available for distribution. Let me check with Saad. That's thumbs up, and Omar thumbs up, and Asma thumbs up, and okay, perfect. So we'll make those slides available by contacting those individuals. I will wrap us up with a dua. اللهم لك الحمد لك الشكر نشهد أنك لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل عليه في الآخرين وصل عليه في الملأ الأعلى حتى يوم الدين. O God, O Allah, O Master, O Creator, we ask you to put blessing in our time, to put blessing in our wealth, to put blessing in our families. O Allah, we ask you to bless our speakers and to grant them generous reward for what they have shared with us. We ask you to put blessings in all of what they do and all of their professional endeavors, their personal endeavors, and their spiritual endeavors. We ask you to put blessings in the center and the programming for the people who put this program together, to guide their path, to guide their efforts, and to make this series one that is beneficial to us as a community, beneficial to our neighbors, and beneficial to all of humanity. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun alal